Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second part of Chapter 6, where we're going to talk about CVP analysis and how different companies look at that. So if you remember where we left off, we were like, okay, we have three main methods of how we can perform CVP profit analysis, or CVP analysis. We can use the profit equation method, we can use the unit contribution margin method, or we can use the contribution margin ratio method. So to start with, we're going to look at the profit equation method. And here, this looks like kind of a complex formula. I promise that it's really not. All we're doing is we're just saying, hey, I have my total sales revenue right here. So total revenue minus my variable cost. What is sales revenue less variable cost? That's my contribution margin. I should know that. So revenue minus variable cost minus fixed costs, that equals my profit. Right, that should all make sense. It's just revenue less cost equals my profit. The only thing I have to consider is I'm like, hey, well, what if I'm actually given my quantities? So I need to say, how much am I charging per unit multiplied by my quantity? How much do I have in variable cost multiplied by my quantity? I have to subtract out some level of fixed cost here, and that's going to give me my profit. So in the most simple form, we're going to start with this example that says Starbucks sells only one type of coffee and at one size. The sales price is $5 per unit. My variable costs are $1 per unit, and my fixed costs are $40,000 per unit. So if I come through, all I need to do is I'm really just going to take my revenue less my variable cost less my fixed costs. Well, that's going to give me my profit. So in this case, what am I solving for? What am I really trying to understand? Well, I'm trying to understand how many units I need to sell in order to generate this target profit. And what is my target profit? Well, it's just 0. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to say I sell my cups of coffee at $5 per unit. And I don't know how many I need to sell to break even yet. That's what I'm trying to calculate. I know it costs me $1 in variable cost, again, at the units that I'm selling, and I have $40,000 in fixed cost. Now, what do I set that profit equal to? I just set it equal to 0. Again, I'm just trying to generate a $0 profit. I am just trying to break even. Okay, so now if we do a little bit of, math manipulation, I will have 4Q equals 40, Q equals 10,000. Okay, so I need to sell 10,000 cups of coffee to break even. So sell 10K cups to break even. That's what I like when I look at this analysis, that is what I should take away from it. Okay, so now my manager is expecting a little bit more of me at this Starbucks, and they're saying, hey, I don't just want you to break even. I want you to generate a $32,000 profit. So don't think about these as two different formulas, okay? Don't think about like target profit and break even as being like super fundamentally different, because I'm going to do the exact same thing as what I just did, where I'm going to say my revenues less my variable costs less my fixed costs need to equal my profit. I haven't changed the formula at all. Now all I need to do is say, okay, I'm selling a cup of coffee at $5. It's going to cost me $1 per quantity that I sell. I have my same 40,000 in fixed cost. Now what's my profit? Remember, in break even, it was 0, but now they're like, hey, I want you to generate $32,000 in profit. Okay. So in this case, I can start just doing some basic algebra, and I'm going to get down again to my 4Q is going to equal 40,000, bring my 40 over, plus 32,000. 4Q equals 72. I'm just doing simple algebra, and I get Q equal to what? 18,000. So now I need to sell 18,000 cups of coffee to generate $32,000 in profit. So again, I think sometimes I see students thinking about these as fundamentally different concepts. They really aren't. All I'm doing is saying under break even, my target profit is 0. And if I want to generate any more than a $0 profit at a break-even point, I just bring that target profit over. And it has to tell me my target profit here too, okay? So the next thing that we can do is we can look at a unit contribution margin method, okay? So what we did so far was just using the target profit equation, and we did that for both break-even and target, or sorry, the profit equation method. We did that for both break-even and target profit. Now we're going to move to the next method, which is unit contribution margin method, and we're going to look at both break-even and my target profit. So in this case, in order to find the break-even point using the unit contribution margin, we need to first remember that my contribution margin is equal to my sales revenue less my variable cost. That's super important, guys. We got to remember that, okay? So now I'm trying to determine, same thing, right? Same thing here. I am still just trying to determine how much I need to sell to cover my fixed costs, leaving a zero profit. So in this case, I'm just going to plug in and say, I know that my sales revenue is 5. I have variable costs of 1. So I have a unit contribution margin of $4. Okay. So now I have to say, well, how many units am I selling? Well, I don't know yet. That's what I'm trying to solve for. And I'm going to set that equal to what? My 40,000. Okay. Why did I set it equal to 40,000? Because I know I have fixed costs of 40,000. So I still am just saying what level of units do I need to sell to cover my fixed costs of my 40,000 bucks. Okay. So now I'll see that that's set equal to 0. And I simply just solve for Q again. Okay. So how many Q's should I have? Well, I should have 10. Okay. But if this isn't easy, super easily, understandable for you, look at it like this. Think about it just in terms of this formula. So I have to say, to cover my total fixed costs of 40,000 bucks, I just need to cover what? My unit contribution margin of $4 a unit. So in this case, now I'm able to solve for my break-even units, which is my 10,000. So my question is, have we seen this 10,000 before? Well, yeah, of course we have. We're just using a different method, but mathematically everything else is still the same. So regardless, if I use the target profit, the break-even method using my profit equation versus my unit contribution, well, it should always give me the same answer. Okay. So same thing here. Now I'm not just wanting to break even. I am wanting to generate a target profit of 32,000. Okay. So now remember, not only does my contribution margin that I'm earning per unit need to cover the fixed cost of 40, I also need to cover an additional profit of 32,000. So I'm going to kind of fill in this chart the same way that I did, where I say I'm generating $5 in revenue per unit. It's costing me $1 in variable cost per unit for a total contribution margin of $4 per unit. Now I have to sell some unknown level of quantities here, right? And my contribution margin, do I know how much that has to equal? No, I don't. Why do I not know yet? Because I have to factor in my fixed costs as well. Okay. And then after I subtract out my fixed costs here, how much do I want to have left over? My net operating income needs to equal my target profit, right? Because I'm saying I want to cover my $40,000 in fixed costs and have $32,000 left over. So again, if you can't readily kind of see it in the chart, we can use this formula here and say, well, I need to cover my total fixed costs of 40,000 plus my target profit of 32. And I need to cover my $1 in variable costs per unit, which I will take care of in my unit contribution margin ratio of $4. So then I get $18,000 units that I need to sell in order to generate $32,000 in profit. Okay. So again, these two things are telling me the same thing because all I did over here was what? Add my $40,000 to my 32. So if you think about it, this and this, they're set up mathematically the exact same way. Okay. So now we can see here a little bit of math proof, if you don't believe me, that it proves that selling 18,000 units at a selling price of $5 generates total sales revenue of 90. Now I need to take care of my $1 variable cost per unit of at 18,000 units. So I will have 18,000 in variable costs, leaving me with a contribution margin ratio or contribution margin, of 72,000. Pull out my fixed costs, and there I'm left with the same target profit that I established that I wanted of $32,000. All right. So the last method here, because think about what we've done. We've said profit equation for break even and target. We have done unit contribution margin for break even and target. And now we have the last method, which is our contribution margin ratio method. Now, again, I'm going to ask you, is this method going to give you a different result than the other ones? No, it's not. So I suppose the question becomes, well, why would you use one method versus the other? I mean, it kind of depends on how does your brain think, like what makes the most amount of sense to you, and also what information do you have? Because sometimes things are just going to be stated in a way that it's going to be easier to use like a contribution margin ratio method. What is an example of something that might be stated in a way that it's going to be easier to use the ratio method? Well, if something gives you a percent of sales here, okay? So if we think about it, we're still selling a cup of coffee, oopsies, at $5 per unit. It still costs me $1 in variable costs, which you should be able to give me some examples of some variable costs that Starbucks might have, right? Probably going to be like a paper cup per coffee that's sold. Maybe they trace the cups of milk into a latte that's sold, etc. So I'm left with a contribution margin ratio. A contribution margin of $4. So now I'm going to look at this as a percentage of sales. So I'm going to say my sales price, well, that's 100% of my sales. You know, sales divided by sales, well, that's going to equal 1. It's going to equal 100%. Now my variable cost, I have what? $1 in variable cost for every $5 that I sell. So that tells me I have a contribution margin ratio or a variable cost percentage of sales of 20%, which tells me my contribution margin ratio is 80%, which what am I taking there? Just my 5 divided by my 4 divided by my 5. Okay. So again, let's employ this method using the same information that we've been using, which is saying I have one type of coffee. There's only one size at a price of $5 per unit. My variable cost is still $1 per unit, and my fixed costs are still $40,000 per unit. Or sorry, not per unit, per month. So we can use the contribution margin ratio method, and notice how I've changed only one thing here in my equation. Notice what my denominator is. Well, my denominator now, instead of being unit contribution margin, is contribution margin ratio. So I still have $40,000 in fixed costs I need to cover. And again, now I have an 80% contribution margin ratio. And if you do the math on that, that's going to give me 50,000. Now, what's really important to understand here is this 50,000 is stated in terms of dollars. So my contribution margin ratio method is stated in dollars. Now think back to the contribution margin, like unit contribution margin that we had. How many units did we determine needed to be sold to break even? Well, we needed to sell 10,000 units in quantity to break even. Well, what price were we selling them at? $5 per unit. So wait a second. I can calculate this same 50,000 if I take my quantity times my sales price. So you can always reconcile it out and make sure that you did it correctly. And again, you can look at it in terms of how we can prove this out to say sales revenue, $5, right, per unit. Variable cost, $1 per unit. I have 40,000 in fixed costs. And the math on that will tell me that I have a net operating income of 0, which is a target profit of 0, which is where I break even. So now again, let's not make this super hard. Let's think about how we can change this formula right here to perform a target profit analysis. Well, in order to do that, all I need to do is add in my target profit right here. I still have 40,000 bucks in fixed costs I need to cover, but now I need to generate an additional 32,000 in my target profit. I haven't changed my contribution margin ratio at all, right? It's still 80% because my sales price is still $5 and my variable cost is $1 per unit. Okay. So my contribution margin divided by my total sales is still 80%. Nothing has fundamentally changed. All I've done is say I want to generate more than just 0 in target profit that I do in break even. So I'll have total sales of $90,000 needed in order to generate 32,000 bucks in profit. So what you could do as well is now you could say, okay, well, how many units is that? So if I wanted to translate this dollars into units, all I need to do is take my 90,000 in sales divided by $5 in sales revenue per unit. And if I pull up my handy dandy little calculator, I'm going to see that I need my 18,000 units in order to generate $32,000 in profit. Again, you should be seeing that number and saying, yep, I've seen that before. That makes sense because I've just used a different method to tell me the exact same information. So those are our 3 methods in order to perform CVP analysis. And we can use either method or like any of the 3 methods for both break even and for target profit. And we can also calculate one and translate it into dollars or quantities, just depending on the information that we have. So I'll see you guys in the next video where we will talk about margin of safety, changes in price structure, etc. See you then.